Lord Theron had never felt cold before. Not real cold. Not the kind that seeped into your bones and made you forget what warmth felt like. But then again, he'd never been poor before either. 24 hours ago, he'd been dining on crystallized fruits from the third moon of Kelthera. His servants had dressed him in robes worth more than a small starship. Dignitaries from 12 systems had bowed when he entered a room. Now he wore those same robes, torn and stained, as he stumbled through the lower decks of Port Celestia. The fabric that once commanded respect now marked him as a target. Other aliens crossed to the opposite side of the corridor when they saw him coming. Some spat. Others laughed. The coup had been swift. His political rivals had fabricated evidence, turned his allies, and stripped everything in one night. By Kelthian law, a disgraced noble kept nothing. Not even dignity. Theron had thought he could find sanctuary somewhere on the station. He'd thought wrong. Every door closed in his face. Every former friend suddenly didn't recognize him. In the grand game of galactic politics, he'd lost. And losers got nothing. So he descended. Level by level, deeper into the station, where the lighting flickered and the air recyclers wheezed. Down where the forgotten gathered. Down where the humans lived. Humans? Theron had never paid them much attention before. They were the new species, barely 50 years into galactic society. They'd arrived on generation ships, fleeing some catastrophe on their dying world. The Council had given them refugee status and nothing else. No worlds, no resources, no respect. They lived in the margins, taking whatever work nobody else wanted. Cleaning waste processes. Sorting recycling. Begging. The human district smelled different. Not worse, exactly. Just different. Like cooking spices and something sweet he couldn't identify. Makeshift shelters lined the corridors, built from scrap metal and old cargo containers. Laundry hung on wires stretched between pipes. Children's laughter echoed from somewhere, which seemed impossible given the circumstances. Theron's legs gave out near a shelter made from a repurposed shipping crate. He slumped against the wall, his vision swimming. When had he last eaten? Yesterday? The day before? Mister? You okay? He looked up. A human child stood before him. Female, maybe 12 standard years old. Brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dirt smudged on her cheek. She wore clothes that had been repaired so many times the patches had patches. But her eyes were bright. Concerned, even. I'm fine, Theron muttered, which was obviously a lie. The girl tilted her head. You don't look fine. You look like how I felt when I had the fever last winter. She glanced at his robes, recognition flickering across her face. You're one of those fancy aliens, right? From the upper levels? I was. The words tasted like acid. Oh. She seemed to understand immediately. She sat down beside him, uninvited, clutching a small metal container. Lot of people lose things here. But it's not so bad once you get used to it. There's shade here if you want to rest. The sun doesn't hit this spot through the viewports. Theron stared at her. Shade? She was offering him shade? This child who lived in a metal box, who probably owned nothing, was offering him comfort? Something about it struck him as absurd. Hilarious, even. A laugh bubbled up from his chest, bitter and sharp. You find this funny? The girl asked, not angry, just curious. Yes, Theron said, his laugh turning cruel. Yes, I find it hilarious that a human thinks she can offer me anything. You're beggars. Your entire species lives on scraps. You have nothing. The girl flinched but didn't leave. We have enough. Enough? Theron's voice rose. Look at you. Look at this place. You're the weakest species in the galaxy. You barely survived getting here. You take jobs nobody else wants and you still can't feed yourselves properly. And you think you can help me? He was being cruel. He knew it. But the words kept coming, all his rage and humiliation pouring out at this convenient target. My people built empires while yours were still learning to make fire. We crossed the stars when you were crawling in dirt. And now you dare, to pity me? The girl stood slowly, hugging her container to her chest. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. I'm sorry you're hurting, she said quietly. I was just trying to be nice. She walked away, disappearing into the maze of shelters. Theron sat alone in the flickering light, his harsh words echoing in his mind. He'd won that encounter, hadn't he? Put an inferior species in its place. Maintained his dignity. So why did he feel worse than before? Day 1 without food was uncomfortable. Day 2 was painful. Day 3, Theron stopped feeling hungry at all, which he knew was a bad sign. His Kelthian physiology could survive longer than most species without nutrition, but that didn't make it pleasant. His vision blurred at the edges. His thoughts moved like sludge. Every step felt like dragging weights. He'd tried begging. Once. Just once. He'd approached a Valyrian merchant, hand outstretched, words forming that he never imagined he'd speak. The merchant had kicked him. Actually kicked him. Called him a disgrace to all nobleborn and told him to die in whatever hole he'd crawled from. After that, Theron couldn't bring himself to try again. Better to starve with dignity than live with that humiliation. He found himself back in the human district without really meaning to go there. His legs just carried him down, down, down to the lowest levels. Maybe because nobody there knew what he'd once been. Maybe because he was too tired to go anywhere else. The same alley. The same metal wall. He slumped against it and closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Just to rest. When he opened them again, the lighting had changed. Hours had passed. Or maybe days? He couldn't tell anymore. His body felt disconnected, like it belonged to someone else. Footsteps. Small ones. Oh no. Hey. Hey, can you hear me? That voice. The girl from before. The one he'd been cruel to. Theron tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. His tongue felt like sandpaper. Don't move, okay? I'll be right back. Her footsteps pattered away. Theron let his eyes drift closed again. Easier that way. Maybe he'd just sleep. Sleep forever. At least then he wouldn't feel this gnawing emptiness anymore. Here. Drink this. Something pressed against his lips. Water. Cool and clean. He drank desperately, some of it spilling down his chin. He didn't care. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever tasted. Slow down. Not too fast or you'll throw up. The girl pulled the container back. Grace. He remembered now. He'd heard another human call her that. She was kneeling beside him, worry creased across her young face. How could she look worried about him? After what he'd said to her. When did you eat last? She asked. 3 days, Theron managed to croak. Maybe 4. Grace's eyes widened. She looked down at the small metal container in her other hand. Theron could see her thinking, weighing something in her mind. Okay, she said finally. Okay, it's okay. She opened the container. Inside was a single protein bar. Not fresh food. Not anything fancy. Just a compressed bar of nutrients, the kind given out at refugee distribution centers. The kind that tasted like cardboard but kept you alive. Theron watched as she unwrapped it carefully, like it was something precious. Which, he realized, to her it probably was. Then she did something that made his remaining strength fail completely. She broke the bar in half. Not evenly. She gave herself the smaller piece and held out the larger one to him. Take it, she said. Theron stared. That's your food. Yeah. And you need it more than me. When did you last eat? Grace shrugged. Yesterday morning. But I'm used to it. You're not. Your hands are shaking really bad. He looked down. She was right. His hands trembled like leaves in wind. Take it, she repeated, pressing the piece into his palm. Please. You're scaring me. You look like Mr. Peterson did before he died. The protein bar felt heavy. Impossibly heavy. This wasn't just food. This was survival. This was everything she had. His pride screamed at him to refuse. He was Kelthian nobility. He didn't take charity from humans. From anyone. But his body betrayed him. His hand brought the food to his mouth. He bit down. Chewed. Swallowed. It tasted like sawdust and shame, but his body sang with relief. He ate the entire piece in 4 bites, too hungry to savor it, too desperate to be dignified. When he finished, he looked at Grace. She was eating her smaller portion slowly. Taking tiny bites. Making it last. She caught him watching and smiled. See? It's not so bad. Food always tastes better when you share it. That was your last meal. The words came out flat. Accusatory. Yeah. But the distribution center opens tomorrow morning. I can get more then. Tomorrow is 16 hours away. Grace's smile didn't fade. I've gone longer. There was this one time during the winter cycle when the centers were closed for 3 days because of that radiation storm. We all got pretty hungry then. But we made it through. Theron felt something crack inside his chest. This child. This human child who had nothing, who faced hunger regularly, who lived in a metal box. She'd just given him her last meal. After he'd mocked her. After he'd called her species weak. Why? He whispered. Why would you do this for me? Grace tilted her head, considering the question like it was strange. Because you needed help. And because my mama used to say that being poor in things doesn't mean you have to be poor in kindness. We can always choose kindness, even when we got nothing else to give. She finished her last bite and licked her fingers clean, not wasting a single crumb. Besides, she added, you looked so sad before. When you yelled. People only yell like that when they're really hurting inside. Theron turned away. He couldn't look at her anymore. Couldn't face that simple, honest compassion. For the first time since his fall, he felt tears burning in his eyes. Not tears of self-pity. Tears of shame. Real, deep shame. He'd spent his entire life believing his species was superior. Advanced. Civilized. But in 3 days of poverty, he'd become cruel and bitter. Meanwhile, this human child who'd known nothing but hardship her whole life could still smile. Could still share. Could still be kind. Thank you, he managed to say. You're welcome. Grace stood up, brushing dust from her patched pants. I gotta go meet Beth now. She promised to show me how to fix the water recycler in our shelter. But maybe I'll see you tomorrow? She walked away, humming something soft and melodic. A human song, probably. Theron sat there as the protein bar settled in his stomach, bringing strength back to his limbs. But it was the weight in his chest that felt heavier now. The weight of a lesson learned too late. The weight of understanding what true nobility really meant. And it had nothing to do with titles or bloodlines or empires. It had everything to do with a 12-year-old girl who shared her last meal with a stranger who didn't deserve it. Theron didn't leave the human district after that night. Where else could he go? At least here, nobody expected anything from him. Nobody knew what he'd lost. Grace found him the next morning, sitting in the same spot. She had 2 small cups of something hot and steaming. Distribution center had extra rations today, she said, handing him one. It's not great, but it's warm. The liquid tasted like watered-down vegetable broth. To Theron, it was the finest thing he'd drunk in days. He sipped slowly this time, learning. Come on, Grace said. If you're gonna stay here, you might as well meet everyone. She led him through the maze of makeshift shelters. Theron had walked through this district before, but he'd never really looked. Now he saw details he'd missed. Flowers growing in recycled containers. Drawings taped to metal walls. A small garden box where someone was growing actual vegetables under a borrowed solar lamp. This is where we gather, Grace said, pointing to an open area where shipping crates had been arranged like benches. About 20 humans sat there, ranging from children to elderly. They looked up as Grace approached. Everyone, this is Theron. He's staying with us for a while. No one asked questions. No one demanded to know his story. A few nodded. An older woman patted the space beside her. Sit, young man. You look dead on your feet. Young man. Theron was nearly 200 years old by Kelthian count. But he's Saturday. An elderly human named Walter was teaching a group of children to read. He used a battered datapad, its screen cracked but functional. The children crowded around him, eager despite their ragged clothes and dirty faces. Sound it out, Walter encouraged a small boy struggling with a word. You got this, Danny. What's that first sound? SSS, the boy said slowly. SSSS star. Star? That's it. See, I knew you could do it. The boy beamed like he'd conquered the universe. Theron watched, fascinated. Where did you get the datapad? He asked Walter. Found it in a trash compactor on level 9, Walter said. Screen's busted and it won't connect to the network, but the reading programs still work. Can't let these kids grow up without learning. Education's the only thing nobody can take from you. Ironic, Theron thought. He'd had access to the finest educational systems and 12-star systems. But this human, living in poverty, understood the value of knowledge better than most nobles. A commotion drew his attention. A woman named Beth was helping a sick man into one of the shelters. The man was coughing badly, his skin pale and clammy. That's Russell, Grace whispered. He got sick working in the chemical processing plant. The foreman won't pay for medical care because Russell's contract says he assumes all health risks. Theron watched as Beth brought water, dampened cloths, and what looked like homemade medicine. 2 other humans took turns sitting with Russell through the day, making sure he didn't get worse. Who's paying them to care for him? Theron asked. Grace looked confused. Nobody. He's sick. We take care of sick people. But what do they get in return? They get to help somebody who needs it. It was such a simple answer. Such a human answer. In Kelthian society, every transaction had a price. Every favor demanded repayment. But here, people helped because someone needed help. That afternoon, a fight broke out near the water distribution point. Two men arguing over who was in line first. Voices rose. Fists started to clench. A tall human stepped between them. Jake, someone called him. Former military by the way he moved. Hey, Jake said calmly. What's this about? He cut in line. I was here first. Jake looked at the line. At least 30 people waited for water. Tell you what. You both look thirsty. How about you both go to the front, get your water together, and then help me hand out rations to everyone else. We'll get through this faster if we work together. The men blinked, their anger deflating. After a moment, they nodded. Just like that, a fight became cooperation. Theron couldn't believe it. That would never work with my people, he muttered. Maybe your people don't practice enough, Grace said. As the day wore on, Theron saw patterns he'd never noticed before. A woman who was good at repairing things fixing a broken heating unit while others brought her food. Children playing together regardless of whose shelter they came from. A man teaching others how to navigate the station's bureaucracy to claim rightful wages from dishonest employers. Everything was shared. Someone's skills. Someone's time. Someone's last meal. That evening, the community gathered for dinner. Not everyone had food, but those who did brought it to the center. A pot of rice. Some vegetables someone had traded for. Protein powder mixed with water to make it stretch further. It wasn't much. But it was divided equally. Everyone got a portion, no matter how small. Theron received his share in a chipped bowl. He stared at it, this humble meal that probably cost nothing by galactic standards. Back home, our feasts had 50 courses, he said quietly to Grace, who sat beside him. Rare delicacies from across the empire. Some dishes took days to prepare. Were you happy there? Grace asked. The question caught him off guard. Was he happy? He'd been powerful. Respected. Wealthy beyond measure. But happy? I don't know, he admitted. Well, we might not have fancy food, Grace said, spooning rice into her mouth. But we got this. We got each other. And some nights, when everyone's together and nobody's hungry, that feels pretty rich to me. Theron looked around the circle. These humans who owned nothing. Who worked impossible jobs for barely any pay. Who lived in metal boxes and wore patched clothes. They were smiling. Laughing. Sharing stories. His people hoarded wealth and lived alone in massive estates, suspicious of everyone, trusting no one. They built walls between themselves and called it civilization. But these humans built community with nothing but their own kindness. They turned poverty into abundance through the simple act of caring for each other. Walter started singing, his voice cracked with age but warm. Others joined in. A human song about home, about journey, about finding light in darkness. Theron didn't know the words, but he listened. And for the first time since his fall, he didn't feel cold anymore. Grace leaned against his shoulder, tired from her long day. See, she murmured. Not so bad here. No, Theron thought. Not bad at all. In fact, in some strange way he couldn't quite explain, this circle of refugees sharing rice from chipped bowls felt more noble than any grand feast he'd ever attended. They were poor in everything except what mattered most. And suddenly, his old life seemed very small indeed. Theron spent his days learning the rhythms of human life. How they traded favors. How they settled disputes. How they survived on almost nothing. But the more he learned, the more he saw how badly the system was rigged against them. It started with Grace coming home angry one afternoon. She'd worked 6 hours sorting recycling for a Valerian merchant. The promised payment was 3 credits. He'd given her half a stale protein bar instead. He said that's all humans are worth, Grace said, trying not to cry. He said I should be grateful he gave me anything. Theron felt rage bloom in his chest. Not the bitter anger of his own misfortune. Something hotter. Protective. Show me this merchant, he said. Grace led him to a shop on level 7. The Valerian stood behind his counter, smug and fat with profit. He barely glanced at Theron's tattered robes. Your worker fulfilled her contract, Theron said carefully. She's owed payment. The merchant laughed. The human? She got paid. Now get out before I call security. Theron stepped closer. He might be disgraced, but he still remembered every law, every regulation, every loophole in the Galactic Commercial Code. Port Celestia operates under Council Trade Law, Section 47. All contracts must be fulfilled as stated, regardless of species. You offered 3 credits. You paid nothing. That's contract fraud. The merchant's expression shifted. Who are you? Someone who knows the law better than you. Theron pointed to the security camera in the corner. Those recordings are stored for 90 days. Would you like me to file a formal complaint with station administration? The fine for contract fraud is 10,000 credits. Plus legal fees. 5 minutes later, Grace had her 3 credits. Plus 2 extra for her trouble. As they walked away, Grace stared at the credits in her palm like they were treasures. How did you do that? I spent a century studying galactic law, Theron said. Might as well use it for something worthwhile. Word spread fast in the human community. By the next day, 3 more people came to Theron with similar stories. Unpaid wages. Broken contracts. Theft disguised as business. He helped them all. Not with violence. Not with power. Just with knowledge. With the laws that were supposed to protect everyone but somehow never protected humans. Then came the day that changed everything. Grace ran into their shelter, breathless and terrified. Theron. They're taking the kids. Who? What kids? Danny, Lisa, Raymond, and Tommy. A merchant named Drelvik says their parents owed him money. He's got debt contracts. He's claiming them as payment. Theron's blood turned to ice. Debt bondage was technically legal under certain circumstances. If a debt couldn't be repaid, contractors could claim service. For adults, it was awful but survivable. For children, it was slavery with a legal name. He ran to the main square. A crowd had gathered. 4 human children huddled together, crying. Their parents held back by station security. And there stood Drelvik, a Canthery merchant, waving legal documents. The debt is legitimate, Drelvik announced. 200 credits, unpaid for 6 months. Under station law, I can claim equivalent service. These children will work in my processing plant until the debt is satisfied. They're children. Beth shouted. The youngest is 7 years old. The law doesn't specify age restrictions. Technically, he was right. Theron knew it immediately. The loophole existed. Rare, yes. Cruel, absolutely. But legal. Unless. I challenge this claim under Kelthian honor code. Theron's voice cut through the crowd. Everyone turned. Drelvik's eyes narrowed. You're Kelthian? You look like a vagrant. I am Lord Theron of the Kelthian Empire. And while I may be disgraced, I am still bound by honor law. As are you, since you operate under the Kelthian Trade Guild license. Theron pointed at the permit displayed on Drelvik's stall. Your guild membership obligates you to our honor codes. Drelvik's face paled slightly. What does that have to do with? Honor Code, Article 12, no contract that brings shame upon the contractor shall be enforced. You want to take children for debt? Children who didn't sign the contract? That's shameful. Publicly, demonstrably shameful. That's not how. Would you like me to call a guild arbitrator? Theron stepped closer. Because I will. I'll make this public. I'll ensure every Kelthian in 12 systems knows that you enslaved children to collect a 200 credit debt. Is that the reputation you want? The crowd held its breath. Drelvik's hands trembled on his documents. He was calculating. 200 credits versus his entire business reputation. The debt is void, he finally muttered. Say it louder. The debt is void. Take your brats. Drelvik stormed away, his profit lost but his reputation intact. The parents grabbed their children, sobbing with relief. The crowd cheered. Grace hugged Theron so hard he nearly fell over. But Jake was staring at something behind them. Theron. You've got visitors. 3 Kelthian officials stood at the edge of the square, wearing formal robes. One stepped forward. Lord Theron. We've been searching for you. Theron's stomach dropped. Had they come to arrest him? To finish his humiliation? The coup has failed, the official continued. Your accusers have been exposed as traitors. The council has issued a full pardon. Your titles are restored. Your wealth returned. We've come to take you home. Silence fell over the crowd. Theron felt dozens of eyes on him. Home. Power. Wealth. Everything he'd lost, offered back on a silver platter. The official glanced around at the humans, disgust barely concealed. Come, my lord. You don't belong with these people. Grace's hand found his. Small. Warm. Trusting. Theron looked at the official. At the promise of his old life. Then he looked at Grace. At Beth and Walter and Jake and Danny. At the community that had shared everything with him when he had nothing. At the people who'd taught him what true honor meant. I'll return, Theron said slowly. But on my terms. And these people come under my protection. All of them. That's non-negotiable. The official blinked. My lord, they're under my protection, Theron repeated, his voice carrying the full weight of restored authority. Is that clear? The official swallowed. Yes, my lord. Grace squeezed his hand tighter. Not afraid he'd leave. But proud he'd chosen to stay, in the way that mattered most. Theron had been a noble before. Had commanded respect through birth and power. But standing there in the human district, surrounded by refugees in patched clothes, he finally understood what nobility really meant. It meant using your power to protect those who had none. And he'd spend the rest of his life proving it. The restoration happened faster than the fall. Within 3 days, Theron stood in the Kelthian council chambers wearing new robes. His estates were returned. His accounts unfrozen. His enemies imprisoned or exiled. Everything was exactly as it had been. Except Theron himself. His first official act shocked the entire council. He proposed the Human Protection Act, granting humans full citizenship rights, legal protections, and representation in galactic commerce. The council erupted in protest. They're refugees. Primitives. They have no resources, no power, no. They have something we lost a long time ago, Theron interrupted. They have community. Compassion. They know how to survive together instead of alone. And they will have my protection. This is not a request. He used every favor owed to him. Called in every political debt. Leveraged his restored position with ruthless efficiency. The act passed by a narrow margin. The next part was personal. Theron returned to Port Celestia with an entire transport of resources. Food. Medical supplies. Building materials. He found Grace in the same spot where they'd first met, teaching younger kids their numbers. Grace, I need to talk to you. She looked up, smiled. You came back. Everyone said you'd forget about us once you were fancy again. Never. He knelt down to her level. I want to offer you something. Full scholarship to the Kelthian Royal Academy. The finest education in the Empire. You'd live in the capital, have tutors, access to any subject you want to study. Grace's eyes went wide. For a moment, she looked tempted. Then she glanced back at the children sitting behind her. At the shelter she called home. At Beth walking past with an armload of laundry. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. 3 days later, she gave him her answer in the community square, with everyone gathered around. I'm grateful, Grace said. Really? But I need to stay here. These are my people. If I leave, who's gonna help them? Who's gonna teach the little kids? Who's gonna stand up to the merchants who cheat us? Grace, you could change the world with that education. Maybe. But I can change this world right here. This community. These people. That matters too. Theron smiled. He'd expected this answer. Hoped for it, even. Then let's change it together. With his resources and Grace's knowledge of what the community actually needed, they transformed the human district. The shelters became real housing. The recycled solar lamp gardens expanded into full hydroponic farms. Medical clinics opened. Schools formed. But Theron didn't just throw money at the problem. He built it with them. Worked alongside Walter to install learning tablets in every classroom. Helped Jake organize a community security team that other species had to respect. Listened to Beth's ideas about sustainable food systems. The human district became something new. Not a slum. Not a refugee camp. A neighborhood. A real community where humans and other species started mixing, learning from each other. Other stations noticed. Other human communities asked how they'd done it. Grace traveled with Theron sometimes, explaining that it wasn't just resources. It was respect. Partnership. Treating humans like equals instead of charity cases. 6 months after his restoration, Theron stood before the full Kelthian assembly. Thousands of nobles watching from their seats. Billions more across the empire tuned into the broadcast. I stand before you not just as a restored lord, he said, but as someone who learned the hardest lesson of my life. We call ourselves civilized. Advanced. Superior. But we've forgotten the most basic principle of civilization: we are stronger together than apart. He gestured to the viewing screen behind him, showing images of the transformed human district. A child taught me this. A 12-year-old human girl named Grace who had nothing but shared her last meal with me anyway. She showed me that true nobility isn't about bloodlines or wealth. It's about how we treat those who can't repay us. How we help those who have nothing to offer in return. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Some approving. Many skeptical. Therefore, I propose a new tradition. Every Kelthian noble, upon reaching maturity, must spend one full cycle serving in a human community. Not as observers. Not as tourists. As helpers. As learners. As equals. The assembly exploded in argument. Voices shouting for and against. The debate raged for hours. But Theron had learned patience from the humans. Learned persistence. And eventually, the measure passed. The ceremony happened a year later. Theron insisted it be held not in some grand hall, but in the Port Celestia Community Center that used to be a cargo bay. Hundreds gathered. Humans and Kelthians. Other species too, curious about this strange alliance. Grace stood beside Theron at the front, wearing a simple dress she'd made herself. She refused the fancy clothes he'd offered. Grace, Theron announced to the crowd, I declare you Teacher of Honor. The first human to hold rank in Kelthian society. Not because I gave it to you, but because you earned it. You taught me what honor really means. He knelt before her, this powerful lord bowing to a 13-year-old human girl. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. Some debts can never be repaid. Only honored. The feast that followed was enormous. Theron had spared no expense. Delicacies from a dozen worlds. The finest ingredients. But Grace made one request. We divide it equally. Everyone gets the same portion. That's how we do things here. So they did. Lords and refugees eating the same meal, sitting side by side. Some nobles looked uncomfortable at first. But by the end of the evening, conversations flowed. Barriers broke down. A Kelthian admiral laughed at a joke told by a human janitor. A council member asked Walter about his teaching methods. Theron watched it all from the edge of the room, Grace beside him. You changed everything, she said softly. No, Theron replied. You did. I just had the power to amplify it. You had the courage to be kind when kindness cost you everything. Other species started adopting similar practices. The Valyrian Merchant Guild established community service requirements. The Canthari created partnership programs with human businesses. One act of compassion, rippling outward across the galaxy. Years later, historians would call it the humanitarian revolution. The moment when the galaxy realized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their heart. And it started with one hungry girl who broke a protein bar in half and shared it with a stranger who'd been cruel to her. Because that's what humans did. They gave even when they had nothing. They shared even when they were hungry. They chose kindness even when the galaxy told them they were too weak to matter. And in doing so, they changed an empire's soul. The end.